Welcome to the podcast, Alban. I'm so excited. We're going to have a fun conversation. We're going to get a lot of good, juicy information, and I think we're going to have a great time. So thanks for coming on and being willing to share your background, your insight, your knowledge. It's going to be great.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah. So give everybody a little bit of background. I know I've done a formal introduction that they've heard before we started chatting, but just give us a little bit of like your roadmap and how you got to where you are working for Buzzsprout, yourself, your development, all of the good stuff.
I've had a little bit of a different journey, I think, than most. I was homeschooled almost my whole life. Went to college, immediately moved overseas to teach school in rural Haiti.
Wow.
Went to law school, practiced law for a little bit. And then after that realized I really do not want to be an attorney. What I really want to do is work in software. And so 10 years ago, I left law to go start working at a software company and have been at Buzzsprout for 10 years. And now I'm the head of marketing and I'm excited to be on the podcast. The podcast is the pinnacle of this whole story.
Right. Yeah. We absolutely love like a unique story. I think all of us can agree that it's not a linear path to the thing that we find that we love doing. Some people it is, and then they'll probably hit a point where they're like, do I even like this? And I don't know. I don't feel like anybody's story is boring, but I always love hearing, you did the thing you thought you meant to do. Software probably at the time when you went to law school wasn't even as prevalently available or an option in your brain. Was it something you toggled around with, or just it took being kind of unfulfilled or not loving law to find something else?
I'd always been pretty involved with technology and followed things. I know my first computer was a DOS computer, so that'd been like early 90s and younger than 10. And so I loved computers, but for some reason, I'd never even considered doing a computer science degree or going down that path. So I was English and literature and religion, just lots of books. And that kind of led me to where I ended up in law school, realizing, and then in practice of law, realizing very little of this lines up with my skill set as a person. And what I really love is optimizing things and finding where we have wasted effort and how could we automate something. What things could we quit doing that really wouldn't have an impact? But law, when you're really just trying to bill as many hours as possible, because all of the money you make is based on how many hours did you bill. Obviously, you're trying to win cases, but as far as the financial part of running a law firm, you're just trying to bill a lot of hours. And I didn't want to work hard or work long. I'd rather work smart. I'd rather have a short period where I worked really hard and really focused to solve a problem that would pay dividends for years. And when you look around, that is the world of software. Maybe it's manufacturing. There's there's a handful of areas, but software was the one that was most easy for me to find a position in.
Yeah. It's the ultimate hourly wage mindset, especially when your billable hours you're making a lot, and I know that's why a lot of people might be drawn to those traditionally like wealthy careers, but it doesn't take long for the entrepreneurial side of you or just the efficiency side of you. And it doesn't surprise me, you having been a homeschooler. I homeschooled my kids for 5 years. We'll probably come back to it here and there. And they go hand in hand, because for me, it was like, well, why am I going to, not do the 8-hour shift because I can get so much more done and I can accomplish something that is a little more meaningful and not just punch the time clock and then send my kids to a school to punch a time clock, So for me, they very much coincided. And I think you just learn efficiency. And I think it's cool that you recognize your skill set wasn't being put to its ultimate use, which is then going to lead to, lack of fulfillment. And that doesn't do the world any good. Even if you would have been a stellar lawyer, I think when your heart is not in it and you don't find that alignment, then you're just punching the clock, right? Just a very high paying one.
It's funny that you drew the connection to homeschooling, because I had not done that. But now I'm realizing there are some very strong similarities. One of which is you learn when you're homeschooled to kind of ride, like, what is your interest at this moment and where is your energy? And the goal is keep the energy high. So the energy for a week may be, I really want to finish these Latin classes, or I really want to figure out what's something in this algebra 2 class I'm in. And we would have periods where I would not really do anything but one subject for 2 weeks.
Mm,
And I may take a whole half a year and not do any vocabulary, and then come in and in a month do the whole year of vocabulary in a very short period. And
mm,
it allowed, my mom allowed me and all my siblings to follow where the energy was at any given moment. And law was very much dictated by the court schedule. And so, we have a deposition, it's scheduled for a certain day. We have 1.2 million documents that relate to this individual. We have to find the right ones. We have to get this done by this specific day. And if your
mhm.
energy wasn't there and your excitement for that deposition wasn't there, it did not matter. There, you needed to have 40 quality hours of prep on this person before you could go into the depot. And often it wasn't there. And I never really developed the muscle of force yourself to do the thing you really don't want.
Mhm.
Instead, I think I developed a skill set, which was notice what you're really loving in this moment and go do that. And so it
Yeah.
was, I noticed that I struggled much harder than some of the other attorneys who seemed to be able to buckle down to a level that I wasn't able to, or at least I seemed to enjoy it way, way less than they did.
Mhm. Yeah, good insight. I'm glad we've had that kind of like breakdown of, oh, okay, this makes you probably make a lot more sense to yourself now just after this little brief conversation. This is why I do what I do. I love it. So, to give us a little bit of insight into you moved into software working with Buzzsprout. You've been there ever since you made that transition. So, and you mentioned you love finding the quickest way to do things, you love systematization. So, what did you start out doing over there? Because now you're in marketing, which in and of itself, I want to dive into because that also requires a lot of systematization and thoughtfulness. So, tell us a little bit more about your journey into Buzzsprout.
Sure. So when I joined, there were 4 people on the team, the 2 founders, my friend who is now the VP of software at Buzzsprout, and a designer. And that was it.
Mm,
So there was nobody who was doing marketing or customer support. And so my pitch to the team was, I'll come in, I'll take all the customer support stuff. I'll do a great job. I'm a writer. And then on the side, I'm going to start marketing and try to see if I can grow this thing.
mm,
And when I started, we regularly talked about marketing as magic beans because so many people had come before me and gone to the founders and said, hey, I guarantee we're going to be able to grow this thing. Here's the lead generation. It's going to be automatic. It's going to be so easy. All we need to do is set up these funnels and we'll
mm.
run paid ads. And every one of them, they went, sounds like you're selling us magic beans. All good. Why don't we just pay you 50% of all the new leads you bring in? And
Mm.
then everybody backed off and they go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I mean, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah,
And they would,
interesting, huh?
and so their perspective was, all right, we're happy to hire you for the support role that you can do for sure. We will take a risk on whether or not you're able to do the rest. But
Mhm.
we didn't have, as a company, any real positive experience with being able to break into a market and start seeing real growth because our experience had been a bunch of people who'd sold us kind of a fake bill of goods, and they'd show
Mhm.
up and they'd promise and promise. And then at the end of the day, they'd, knock out some work that was really subpar and it wasn't connected to the business as a whole. It didn't really understand the underlying market or even our framework for marketing. We had none. And
Mhm.
so it was just a couple weak experiments that never really led to growth.
Yeah. Well, having worked in marketing a little bit, one of our frustrations, my husband and I have done this for a while, is trying to come in when there isn't that underlying strategy, when you don't really have a lot of the foundational things figured out. And then people will come to you, or, in your case, they were pitching to you saying, like, oh, we can just do this and this and this. And it's not very insightful to not consider all of the things that maybe haven't been done or considered or factored in yet, because it's like putting a band aid on a bullet hole, or, maybe some better analogy than that where we're not trying to stop bleeding necessarily. We're trying to grow something, but it can't unless we figured out those foundational pieces. So, and I know the era that you're talking about because I feel like podcasting emerged at the same time that funnels emerged, and there was just a lot of this like overpromising, underdelivering, and just put the funnel on, turn on, click the button, and you'll see massive leads. So makes perfect sense that you were seeing a lot of that being subpar, because when you miss those deeper pieces, I know you're going to agree because you focus on marketing now. Any strategy, as good as it might be, is not going to work if it's not like ingrained in with all of the deeper stuff.
My experience was most of them were not really pitching a strategy. I would say they were
Mm,
pitching us a channel that they
hmm.
understood pretty well. And so they
Yeah.
might have worked in e-commerce for a while. And from experimentation, they realized, hey, a lot of our e-com clients do pretty well with Facebook ads. It was extremely popular then. And so they went, oh, so we know how to set up Facebook ads. You get good images, you get the customer list, you upload the customer list, you do a lookalike. And they went, boom, that's the strategy. And they took that one channel that they developed some competency with, and they'd imagined that that was marketing. But what marketing is identifying who is your customer, who is your ideal customer, who's the person that when they see your product, they go, oh, that's for me. Like they identify that themselves. And then what's the message that you want to get in front of them? What's the message that will get them to say, oh, that's the product for me. I've now identified I should sign up for this. All right. So once you have those, where are those people? Because once you know where they are, what the message is, and that there's a high likelihood that when they see the message, they will identify that you did build them something, then it's going to work out and it's going to be pretty easy. But you've got to go through those steps. Who is the person I'm trying to market to? What's the message that will convince them? Obviously, the product has to be there. But then where are they? How do I get in front of them? And so many marketers are really focused on that last piece. Where are they? And so they come up with these ideas like, let's run a Super Bowl ad. It's expensive, but I'll get in front of so many people. I'll accidentally be in front of like 50 of the right people, and then we'll see some leads. And so they end up way overspending, or just imagining that the only way for them to ever grow would be to have a giant budget. But the truth is, if you can identify who the people are, then you only need to target a handful of them, because once you actually target them effectively with the right message at the right time, then you're going to be able to get leads and ultimately grow the product.
Yeah. Okay, guys, that was marketing 101. I mean, we love that, right? We need to hear the essentials. Those are the basics. And I think as an entrepreneur who's been here for this whole crazy wild ride of the internet and online marketers and all of these things that you just mentioned too, where a lot of people are focusing on the where, I know it has been difficult for me to sift through that and feel and understand really what marketing is. Like I have a knack for it, but I think it became very polluted by the trend or the surface level thing, the hack of the moment, if you will. And I ignored some of those fundamentals where if you get too caught up in the shiny object of like, oh, this funnel's working or this strategy's working, and you lose sight of the fact that it's not a comprehensive strategy, it's just like one little way. It's like the very, very end point, then you're going to be frustrated when it doesn't work for you. So it's no shock that, and you know, in the early stages when you were having these people, I don't know if they ever even came in and tried and it was lackluster results or not, but it's not shocking that you weren't seeing much of the output. So I want to kind of like not shift gears, but continue on that vein and talk a little bit about podcasting in not in general, but even marketing for podcasting, because I know that that's probably changed a lot. So what have you seen as you kind of took that on? Obviously you've had success because a lot of people know who Buzzsprout is. And so maybe take us through a little bit of a timeline journey and then even just adding in some of those principles you gathered and understood in terms of marketing that you can share with the rest of us.
Yeah, to give some numbers, an idea of size. When I started, I think Buzzsprout had less than 2,000 customers, and now we have over 120,000 active podcasts.
Oh yeah,
So,
just a little leap there.
well, well, we've been very fortunate because the market as a whole has grown really incredibly in that period. But we've
Mhm.
also gone from, I mean, pretty much zero market share to a very healthy percentage. So things that worked were, I mean, I guess kind of following where our own energy was. I was naturally more excited about being a teacher than a seller. I always
Mm.
felt like the hard sell felt so gross and I couldn't get myself into, hey, I'm going to run a free webinar, and the webinar is really
Yeah.
going to be a lead to try to get you to go do something else. And you feel kind of bait and switched. Instead, I'd sit down and go, the joy of the internet is if you spend 2 weeks writing a podcasting guide and it's really good, that podcasting guide will live for years. There's so many people out there who need it that if you write the best one, then there's going to be these outsized returns to what you wrote. And so the first one I wrote was how you should create podcast cover art. So I went and researched it a ton. I read tons of blog posts and watched videos, and I just looked at all the artwork I liked. And I wrote this guide. And a few weeks later, I realized oh, that's getting 1,000 views a month organically that I'm not doing any additional work. So it was fun for me to write it, but now it's really fun to see it's continually getting shared and it's getting us constant leads. And so we initially leaned in a lot into blog writing. I started teaching myself SEO. I'd get hooked up with these different tools. I try to find keywords, figure out the searcher intent, and then write a guide. Over time, the blog continues to grow. We're seeing that be successful. And we go, all right, well, we're a podcasting company. We've got to have a podcast ourselves. And so we start podcasting. And then we got into video and we got into courses. And at some point along the way, we tore down all of the paid ads we'd ever done and started rebuilding them with a bit more of that marketing framework. Who really are we a great fit for? Not anyone who wants to start a podcast, but what specific audience really loves us? And then what are they searching? How do we target them? And what are the right messages? And when we rebuilt our paid acquisition with that mindset, it started becoming extremely successful rather than just kind of an endless money pit.
Yeah, because the specificity is what pays. And I love hearing the evolution, and that was a good little light bulb in my head to say, okay, where's the energy? I love to teach. And I think sometimes you can be the round peg in the square hole, where you're trying to, well, this is what we're supposed to do. This is how marketing is supposed to work. We're supposed to do the webinar. We're supposed to offer just a little bit of value and hook them in so they want more. And I think that leaning into your strength, leaning into what you actually enjoy is going to feel so much more authentic. It's going to lead to those higher conversions. And so I love that. I love every piece of what you just shared. We're living in 2025. You obviously just said your market increased tremendously, a lot more people. And I don't know about you, but there was a couple years there where TikTok and video was really taking off, where I was I've sold podcasting programs and I've done some coaching in that area as well. And I was I don't know, podcasting might be dying. And then it hit this huge wave. Are you seeing that there is a huge uptick in podcasting even now after I feel like we had a huge, maybe cusp of the wave several years ago and now we're peaking again?
I think the peak for new podcasters was probably mid 2021. Because during COVID, so many people were either out of work or just started having more time at home and went, okay, I've had this desire in me for so long to start something and become a creator. And so they started creating. We saw way more YouTubers and way more people on social and way more podcasters. So that was the peak of maybe new people coming in. But so many of them have continued. Anybody who started and really breaks past that 10, 20 episode mark, they mostly start to stick around. And so we've seen lots of people continue. So right now, I think we're at the peak of active podcasters, but probably the new entrants has slowed down quite a bit from back during COVID.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. I mean, you would definitely have that insight and that data from where you sit. So talk to me a little bit about this. I'll have people ask me sometimes, and I have a different maybe opinion than most would have. And I went from saying everybody should have a podcast, mostly because when I started mine, it was almost 10 years ago. There weren't that many, and I wanted more people to collaborate with, I wanted other shows that we could be on each other's shows, that we could really help grow the world of podcasting to be competitive with other ways of media, Instagram, YouTube. And nowadays I would offer a little slightly different advice, but what is your take on this? If somebody's maybe, let's say that they're in an early stage of entrepreneurship. They're trying to grow their business. They're looking for marketing strategies. Would you recommend podcasting as a marketing tool? Would you recommend it? Like, where would it fit into a general sales funnel if you are trying to build a business? And do you recommend people start one if it's just for that reason? Or like, I'm just curious what your feedback would be to somebody who's asking, should I?
It's very, it's going to be very specific based on the business. It's going to be pretty varied what my
Hmm.
answer would be. So thinking about all these different channels of just content marketing, writing blogs. If you're good at SEO, that can be a good channel to bring people in. As people start finding your content and they start building a bit of brand awareness. Maybe video, because YouTube will recommend that video if it's really good. That can become a way to build brand awareness and some brand affinity. Podcasting is much further down the funnel. They're much, much harder to grow than video. They're much harder to grow than blog. They're much harder to grow almost anything besides maybe a good email list. But they have the same effect as a good email list, which is it's platform agnostic. When you have a great email list, it doesn't matter if you're on ConvertKit or Aweber or some other email service. You can just switch at any moment and it doesn't matter. If
Hmm.
you don't play by YouTube's rules or TikTok's rules, or maybe they change, that they don't want to have your type of content anymore, then all of a sudden that whole channel dies.
Hmm.
So they have the positive of TikTok, style growth where something can go like super mega viral. But the other side is you don't own this audience at all. Podcasting is all the way on the other side, only next to email. And
Mm.
email and podcasts you have complete control, because when you email people who are on the list intentionally and you drop a podcast into their feed, well, but they're going to see it. And that's why it's so hard to grow. So I
Mm.
think of them not as growth strategies, but as retention and relationship
Hmm.
building. So some of the podcasts I've seen, they're super successful, are for long sales cycles. So if I love this story. There's I guess a very tight or very small community of people who are looking to set up a call center.
Mm.
And you imagine if you set up a call center and you're actually building it from the ground up, it's a very expensive endeavor. And so the sales cycle is really, really long. And we had a podcaster who, that's what he did. He helped set up call centers. And he started a podcast just talking about, here's what you could do to set up your call center. Here's the metrics you should be using. Here's the type of people we try to hire. Here's the optimal setups for designing the room. And he would just teach it. Well, he was only getting something like 150 plays per episode. But that market is so tight. The number of people who are actually looking and considering setting up a call center at any given moment, it's not that big. So
Hmm.
150 was actually reaching almost all of his ideal clients. And people would use his content to try to set things up themselves, and they'd hit some sort of a roadblock. And then they'd reach out and go, hey, we've built so much trust with you because we've listened to your voice teach us this for 40 hours at this point. We know you, we know about your family, we know everything you've shared on the podcast. And you've taught us so much. We have so much trust. We just need to know where to sign. There's no more sales cycle. And so he was telling us out of 150 plays per episode, he was getting paid speaking gigs. He was asking to keynote at the industry events. He was getting his biggest clients. And he was like, it's kind
Wow.
of shocking. It's such a small group, but I was reaching the perfect audience. So for him, podcasting was perfect.
Hmm.
But if I was trying to sell t-shirts, I was making designs and trying to sell t-shirts online, I probably wouldn't start a podcast because most t-shirts are just a impulse purchase. Somebody
Hmm.
sees it, they go, that's cute, I'm going to buy it. And they click buy and they forget about it until it shows up. If you're in that kind of a world, you're going to be looking at much more, how do I get broad exposure that will quickly take people from never hearing, never even thinking about me to purchaser in a few minutes. And then you're looking at something like Instagram ads as being kind of your ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, I would agree on that. I think that's always what I tend to ask people when they're like, "Oh, would this be a good idea? Like, should I start a podcast?" And a lot of times it's like kind of a fleeting thought or idea of like, "Oh man, I could talk about this thing forever and ever." And I say, "Okay, but what's like the bigger strategy? What's the overall thing that you're trying to achieve and what is the purpose? Like where does the podcast even fit into that?" And a lot of times we'll find it's something that would be a really good idea for like 12 months from now or 2 years from now after you've hit some of these other benchmarks. Or maybe it's just not even the best place for you to put your energy. And I think right now there's so many places for us to put our energy. You have to be really intentional about that. I love podcasting, obviously, and it's kind of along the lines of what you said earlier. It's knowing where to put your energy and it's knowing the thing that lights you up and it's knowing what's in alignment. So for me, yeah, I can write. I'm a decent writer. I think I'm actually a pretty good writer. I'm a copywriter. And I would still rather I'm the person using, like, the voice prompts with ChatGPT, like, that changed my life where I can just talk because I love vocalizing and I love conversation, and this is a really powerful tool for me, and I also know that networking is my favorite thing ever. So I think it's knowing, your own strategy, your own strengths, and understanding making sure it serves a purpose and not just starting one because everybody's starting one, and that legitimizes you to have a podcast, and you wanna be like so and so. So yeah, I agree with you. It's more like it's further down the funnel. It is more of a nurture platform than necessarily an attraction platform. So good insight. I think everybody needs to hear.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're going to keep coming back to this the whole time, but where is your energy right now? What is in your mind the most exciting experiment you could run in marketing?
Hmm.
Pick a period where you think I will have an idea of whether or not this is working. Maybe it's a month. You say, okay, in a month, I will have 4 episodes live and I'll promoted those episodes and I'll sent them to prospective clients who I think it's really useful for and get it done in that month. And if
Hmm.
that's where your energy is right now, then go for it 100%. You don't need to try to like have 4 different things going at once. Just try the
Hmm.
one. And if the energy right now is, man, Instagram ads actually has caught my interest and that seems fun, go give yourself a couple weeks to experiment with it and see how quickly you can validate that idea. The
Hmm.
goal is to try things and try them enough that either at the end you will know this is a real marketing channel for us that now we can 10x and put a ton more resources behind, or this doesn't appear to be working, so we're going to stop and maybe we revisit in 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
Every 2 to 3 years, I come back to Facebook ads and go, I really feel like Buzzsprout should be able to run Facebook ads effectively. And every 2 to 3 years, I go, it doesn't look like that's the case. And I
Mm.
reasons why I don't think it's ever worked. But it's good to be able to experiment and then turn your brain off for that channel for a while and go, we're okay. We don't need to pursue that nonstop and always wonder because we gave it such a good attempt that when it failed, we turned it off. And when we put a bunch of effort into Google ads and it blew up, we go, oh, okay. So we realize what types of channels work for us and which channels may not.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. That's so insightful and helpful. There's the part of me that has like, little ADHD tendencies. It's like, is that responsible? Yeah, it's kind of what I've done a little bit here and there. And you almost have to scratch the itch, but I love that it's strategic. It's intentional. It's not just like getting pulled away with whatever is like trending, but just honestly giving it thought and strategy and giving yourself a time frame and saying, I'll try this and I'm going to learn what I need to learn and test it out. And so I think that's really good advice. There are so many different ways that we can dabble and try different marketing strategies. I know that you mentioned like you've done a lot with content marketing. So let's assume that we're talking to somebody who does have a podcast or somebody who is like, yeah, this is the right fit for me. I'm going to start one. With everything we're saying where it's really more of a nurture thing, what are you seeing that's working for you guys as a company? And then even what do you recommend for other podcasters in terms of getting more exposure to the podcast or more exposure to their brand? What have you found that's working?
Are you saying trying to grow the podcast or what strategies have helped the podcast be more successful?
I guess a little bit of both, but I think more so the marketing strategies, content marketing that have helped grow a podcast, like bringing people in. If it's not something that is necessarily as searchable as other platforms, like what are you finding works to drive people to the show?
Yeah, so we're mostly using other channels to entice people in.
Mm.
Then maybe we do a YouTube video, and then we say, if you, at the end, at one point, we actually went much more in depth on an episode of Buzzcast, which is our show about the podcasting industry, and we might highlight the show there. So anybody who found us through a broad outreach channel like YouTube, then they can see this video. And the ones who are interested to learn more and are interested to commit an hour to learning more about podcast statistics, they can go listen to the episode. But
Mm.
there's no, that it has to be kind of a self-selected audience that want that deep dive. When we write podcasting guides on our website, we will often link to specific episodes where maybe I did an interview with somebody who's a subject matter expert, or we did a lot more research and we learned a lot about that area and we talk about it in depth. Then people can go listen to it. We have, a weekly newsletter we send out to 400,000 podcasters.
Mm.
And at the top of it, we just said, if you want instead to listen to this as a podcast, go ahead and just click listen to the podcast. And we're basically reading that newsletter and telling you everything you need to know about the industry this week.
Mm.
So almost all of our podcasting growth is tied to other channels, because podcasting is very difficult to grow because there's not an algorithm recommending podcasts. It's people recommending it to each other. And sometimes the person recommending it will be us recommending our own content, but we already have to be in front of the audience to do that.
Yeah. And explain to our listeners too, kind of you mentioned there's no algorithm. I've seen podcasting experts who will say, like, you can totally optimize your titles of your episodes and you can grow your show like that. And they're like super anti using social media. You don't need anything else, but just optimize the podcast itself. What's your thought and opinion on that? Like, do you feel like that's a much harder strategy than just bringing some outside exposure to your show by trying to like optimize your titles?
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit BS. Like, I mean, how many times have you ever gone into a podcast app? You've gone into Apple Podcasts and you search Seth Godin and you're hoping to find a Seth Godin interview. Maybe some people do that. And so maybe if you get Seth Godin on your podcast, you can optimize that title to be Seth Godin, like interview, and maybe someone will click it. But the reality is nobody's going in to Apple Podcasts and searching Alban Brooke, trying to find an interview about me. And so you optimize this title, and they ended up finding it and going, oh, this is perfect. Mostly what's happening is people find a few shows that were recommended them by a personal friend, someone in their life. And they find those 4 or 5 shows, and they pretty much listen to every episode of those handful of shows, as long as it continues to be good. And that's it. And they've just got them kind of going on in their life. And so they build a ton of trust and love for these few shows. Every once in a while, someone will say, you should really check out this new podcast. And they get a recommendation and maybe has a chance to break in. But they're building an ongoing relationship. So the idea that the title is going to make you go viral inside of a podcasting app is just, I don't see that working. I've seen podcasts go viral because they had Instagram shorts or IG shorts that really went, they got a lot of traction and then they linked to the podcast. That's worked. I've seen people do YouTube videos and then people see like, oh, instead of watching the thing on YouTube, I could just listen in Apple Podcasts. That's worked. We've seen tons of things work. I don't think I have a single case study of somebody doing podcast SEO and that was the way that they grew their podcast. Okay, I have one. Maybe let me give you one. This has got to be like 8 years ago, maybe even longer. A doctor reached out and he had a podcast about virology. And he said, hey, I think my stats have been hacked or something because I'm getting way too many stats. And we looked and it all looked legit, but it was because he'd done a podcast about Ebola and we had the Ebola outbreak. And so when that happened, a lot of people wanted to learn more about Ebola and like global interest in Ebola went up 10,000 times. And so some percentage of people were searching, but then mostly people went, oh, there's a professor of virology talking about this. Let's share this episode around. So
Mhm.
maybe that one got a little bit of help because he did mention what he was talking about in the episode, but it
Yeah.
was not an SEO play. It was just, he was the expert and he'd done an episode about it. And so when everybody was trying to figure out, hey, this is kind of scary, we got to learn more about it, he was the one that his podcast was getting recommended.
Yeah. I almost think, I mean, that's so funny, and I'm sure you enjoyed the uptick for a minute, but it's so true. Like, and I'm thinking there's two things I want to mention. When you Google, you're not typically seeing like a podcast RSS feed coming up in the Google search. Like, they would have had to put that content on another piece of content, right? Like a blog post, or like you said, YouTube video, or even TikToks are searchable. Sometimes Instagram things will come up. But it's not likely that your Buzzsprout like native page is going to come up when somebody searches that topic. So I think people need to understand that the platform is not SEO optimized even for the greater playground of the internet. And maybe if you're searching something in your podcasting app, which like you mentioned, you're not really as likely to do, you're not going there to like seek out information the way you do with Google or even YouTube. You're going there because you've already subscribed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important thing for people to know, that it will require outside marketing efforts. And then the other thing that I was going to say, because you compared podcasting to an email list, which I think is really, really smart. And I almost think of titles of your episodes like your subject lines. We're assuming they're already there. And so you
Right.
want to title things and optimize them so that it's, who you're talking to, what might actually intrigue them to listen to this episode. It's not necessarily so that it's reaching out there and finding these brand new people. It's for the people who are already there. Let's get them to open. Let's get them to push play. So I think that's a good parallel in terms of strategically trying to grow a podcast. And I'm glad that you said that. It's kind of not really relevant because I've heard this advice, and I think it was playing to the pain point of being able to not have to use social media. You could just have a podcast. And I'm over here like, there is no way I could have just had a podcast for the last like 10 years and actually had any substantial growth. And that could even be from the guests you're bringing on, who they do have social media and they're bringing their people. So, and you brought up that point where a lot of it is referral, people telling their friends about a show they need to listen to. So have you noticed that too with Buzzsprout, that that's been a huge part of your strategy, is bringing on guests and having other voices come onto the show so that you're reaching their network?
That is, well, not bringing on guests. We typically don't have guests on our show,
Mm,
but word of mouth, there's a lot you can do to enable word of mouth. So actively ask people, say, we'd love for you to recommend this to a friend. Think of who that friend is and text them this episode. We'd really appreciate it.
mm-hmm.
Also, make your podcast, really think about who's the ideal audience. A lot of podcasts are like, oh, I'm just telling stories from my childhood. I'm like, okay, that's fun. Is if your goal is to grow, which isn't everyone's goal, but
Mm-hmm.
if your goal is to grow, what kind of person wants to hear stories about your childhood? The target market might just be your family, which is totally fine. But if
Mm-hmm.
you want it to be really big, you're going to have to be, like a comedian. Like, you got to think through, okay, it's people looking for comedy. How do you sell then to that audience? A lot of times
Mm-hmm.
people think, well, if I tell a story, probably most people would want to hear it. But if you can't articulate who's the audience for this podcast, it may be because there's not really an audience, which is
Mm-hmm.
okay. Sometimes the podcast only goes to 30 people and it's still really enjoyable. I send lots of texts that only go to 1 or 2 people, and they seem to enjoy it when I text my friends. Not everything has to be mass market.
Yeah.
So who's the audience? And if you can make that audience very, very specific, what ends up happening is people recommend it for you. So imagine if I started a podcast about lawyers transitioning into marketing and what skill sets are you bringing over? Well, the market is now really tight. There's probably not many of us who've done this, but I know a handful. So there's some out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now if anybody hears about that podcast, they're going to go like, oh, well, my friend Rachel did this, so maybe I should send this to Rachel. And they'll write her and go, Rachel, do you know that there's another guy who did the same thing as you and he does a podcast? Well, she's going to be excited to listen. That's a very recommendable show. But a
Yeah.
show that was like, me telling stories from my childhood, the only person who's going to hear that and go, that's the thing I want to hear, is my mom.
Yep. Well, we've had to shift overall in all content that way. And I know I kind of have gone through that transition where at first my show, I was interviewing moms and it is very storytelling because it's like there was that connection piece and that's what a lot of people were loving. And so it was easy to get into the habit in the influencing world too, where like people just want to see what you're doing and they want to hear about your life. And then we had this mass transition to where it's like, we don't want you to show off your life to us. We don't just want stories. Like we want some meat with this. Like show us how it's relevant to us. And so there has had to be this shift to what is in it for them. And maybe all along there should have always been something in it for them. I think that has just changed a little bit. And so I remember still that like point when I had to think about the way I was positioning my show to yes, we can still incorporate those stories, but what are they going to actively be wanting and needing and how is this going to serve them? And how can this episode bring value beyond just sharing a great story and inspiring them and giving them, a good little dopamine hit. And that requires a lot more intention and thoughtfulness. And that in and of itself is marketing, right? Like that is taking it from I'm doing a project, I'm creative, I love this thing into, oh, I really do care about this reaching people and having an impact. And so I have to think about more than just myself, more than just like the reason that I love it and figure out those missing pieces. So yeah, I love it. Marketing is so simple and it's universal and it applies to every platform. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, one of the rubrics we often talk about is do for one what you wish you could do for many. And
Mm,
what the reason we say that is because a lot of times you kill good ideas because you imagine, well, this will be hard to scale. I don't want
mhm.
to try to figure out how to do this for 10,000 people. And so if I said, hey, we're going to start a podcast and I'm pretty much going to record this episode to try to land this specific client and I'm going to send it to them. I'm going to take a full 2 days to write a blog post that's pretty much targeting one company and I'm going to send it to them and say, I wrote this for you. A lot of times we kill those ideas because we immediately think, I'm not going to do that for all of our clients. We did something for a period where when people hit 1 year podcasting with Buzzsprout, we would send them like a cupcake in the mail and a candle and a little party hat. We'd say like, oh, it's your Buzzsprout birthday. And everyone who got them loved them. But
Mhm,
that's obviously something that's not going to scale. We're not going to be able to
mhm.
do that forever. We can't do it for our international customers, but we could have just killed it. Or we could just have the fun and say, hey, we wanted to do this. So we're going to do it for the few people that we can do it for. So
Yeah.
with a lot of companies, especially when you're small, like the real joy is that you can do any of these things for a small group and see real growth because 10 new clients may be more growth than you've seen in the last year.
Good insight. Okay, there's so much more that I want to talk to you about. Maybe we could have you on again to dive into even more because I feel like you're a wealth of knowledge. You've been in the world of podcasting, marketing, all the things. What is like maybe a final piece of advice that you have for our listeners if they're in those early stages of growing something, having worked in more of the startup phase with Buzzsprout and seeing pretty much everything in between? Do you have anything you just want to leave everybody with in terms of motivation or strategy?
Well, I'm trying not to give as much advice now because I think advice often is so context specific that it's often not very helpful. But for myself, things that I've found to be really valuable has been following where my energy is in any given moment. My level of intelligence goes down by 80% the minute I have to do something I don't want to do. And I used to think it was just like I could, white knuckle it a little harder. I could try harder. I could have more willpower. But the truth is, if I can get myself excited about something, I'll work out twice a day, every day for 3 months. If I don't get excited about it and I'm just told you have to do it, it's very difficult for me to do anything. And
Mm,
so for me, what's been very helpful these last few years and helpful from, with my journey in marketing, helping me with podcasting, helping me with everything is where is the excitement in this moment? And how do I channel that to be something, how do I channel that excitement to drive the business forward, to drive our marketing forward and just keep giving me energy.
yeah, I love that. And it's so funny. You mentioned to me before, like, I'm really kind of aware of this. I don't want to give as much advice, or I'm aware that advice is context specific. So it's kind of funny that I asked you that final question, but I love it. I think framing it from like, this is what's working for me is great advice for anybody to hear. And I appreciate it. Everything you've shared today has been really valuable. Where's the best place for people to connect with you off the podcast?
You could find me on albanbrooke.com, or you could find me over on Twitter, or you could come over to Buzzsprout if you want to learn more about podcasting. And we have tons of guides, and we'd love to help you start your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been great spending time with you. And I hope all of our listeners will go and all those places, check it out. Join our world of podcasting if it's the right fit for you. So thank you again.
Thank you.